Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week on the Cyclekart I'm back on the front end working on suspension and steering. See you in a minute. Okay, so it's time to spend a bit of time now making these stub axle ends do a bit more than be attractive paperweights. They don't work at the moment because they can't turn because of the square edges on them, and they're not particularly attractive, so they want a bit of a tidy up. I'm just going to put them in the router and get the rough edges off them, take the corners off with a round over bit, same as I'm using on the steering wheel, and then we'll just gradually work away at them until we get a bit of shape into them and make them look something a bit more suitable for a cycle cart. That's got them roughly to shape. They're not very pretty at the moment, but they are at least in the right shape, and what that's done now, that's made them so that I've got what I'm not likely to need, 90-degree lock on the front to 90-degree lock at the rear. You know, I'm not going to need 180 degrees of lock, but that's given me the clearance, and that's really all I'm after with the shaping. What I'll do now is cosmetic rather than mechanical, and that's just to get this lot in a situation where it's a lot less rough. And I'll start off with a file on that, and then when we've been over it with the file, we'll then start and put it onto the belt sander, start and work on it from there, and then once I've got it to a shape I'm happy with, I'll then run it further onto various grits of sandpaper right down to fine, and then we can polish it and hopefully it'll come up like chrome when it's finished. Okay, it's got them pretty much clean up now. That's got the two stub axles done. They're both pretty much the same. They just now need, before I get too involved in getting them fancy work on them, they need these plates bolting to them now. So I'm going to drill the holes for bolts in the plates, drill and tap these. I said originally I think I was going to do M6, but I think M8 would be better. Give it a good solid fixing, and then these will of course have to have screws, machine screws, put all the way through them, countersunk, so that they'll be sticking out to receive the end of the axle. But I'm quite happy with those now. They just want, as I say, an awful lot, several hours of careful filing, sanding, polishing to get them anywhere near, but I think we're on the right track with them. Now I've got the front wheel mounted on a spindle on both of the front spindles. It's given me the chance to finally tie down all of the things I need to sort the front axle out. It's given me the distance from the outer edge of the front spindle bolt head to where the front axle will join this whole sort of kingpin and stub axle end assembly. That's 225mm. It gives me the centre of the track to that same position, which is 175mm, so I can work backwards from the known requirements of the Cyclekart for track width, overall cart width and all that sort of thing. And so that means I can now get this front axle itself sorted, which will open up getting the whole of the front end into a state where it's finished and rolling around on the chassis. Now, I've had a few thoughts over the last months about whether or not I get a welder and start to weld, or whether I got somebody to weld it. And it came to me the other day that there's the steering column, which will need a pair of pitman arms welding on it to operate the steering, and there is the steering, the front axle, I mean, where it reaches there, where it bolts to the stub axle end. And I suppose the question is, do I really want to trust those two components in a Cyclekart to my welding skills, which are zero, and I'm starting from having to go out and buy a welder? And I think practically and sensibly that is just not a safe thing to do. Okay, I'm making a steering wheel, and that could be potentially an issue, and I'm aware of that. But at least with that, I believe that if there is any problem or prospect of failure, I'll know about it long before anything severe happens. With something like this, in a cart that could be travelling at 40 miles an hour, I don't really want to find that the stub axle falls off when I'm heading for a corner. So this will enable me now to go away and mock up the front axle on a stand with these collars, the metal plates already drilled, so that the welder can just literally come along and weld what I've set up for him, so there's no problem about him having to worry about geometry or anything like that. So you can do that. The other thing is that I've got these brackets which go on the rear side of the front stub axles, but effectively they're sitting on there. They'll be bolted to that, and they're coming in at 45 degrees to the frame rails of the cart. And again, they're sort of restraining all of this stub axle end, because there is only a centre point where the spring mounts. And that's again something that I was a little bit unsure about. They're okay, they're 2 or 3 mil metal, they're stainless, but again I have to ask myself whether or not I think that is strong enough, and common sense says no, it's not. What it needs is a metal tube to go between the two faces, which are actually the same size as the parts I took out of the rear axle, but it wants something like that. That will give me a lot of strength then to carry arms top and bottom with a bolt right the way through. And then there is the question of whether that part is strong enough, and what it means now is I can again get some plate, stainless, and get the welder to weld up that whole centre area there as like a gusset. I can still get in to bolt them up, but it will just make that whole thing into a really solid section that's welded to the upright, welded to that, welded across top and bottom, triangulates it all and makes it much stronger. So I can get them to do that. I'm just working my way through now on all the things that I think might need any welding doing on the cart, and then I can just take the whole thing along to somebody, if I can find somebody, and I'll have a hunt round, have a chat round mates and all that sort of thing, and just get this done in one hit. The other thing that I'll have to do is drill the axle, or I can drill it perhaps, I don't know, and put a couple of tubes through it to be welded in, which will be for the spring hangers as well. So there's that as well to do. Right, so going back to my original thought processes of wanting to make it simple and add lightness, I'm changing my sort of way of doing the front axle. I think I've gone down a rabbit hole of getting all this adjustment into something which is probably unnecessary, because I can make the whole front end setup adjustable. I noticed on the drawing of the original Austin 7 front end, if you look at it, where this front end is, the spring is sitting, that hole is basically on the slant on the nose cone, and that's, I think, because the whole of their front end tends to sort of work in a radius around the track rod ends. So I'm going to start and make it simple. I'm throwing away all of the bits of aluminium that give me two discs that can be mounted at any angle or whatever. I'm going to get two discs welded onto the end of a straight axle with a hole top and bottom, and that whole top and bottom will just go straight into the aluminium billet stubs that I've got M8 threaded, tapped in, bolted up tight, and then the whole thing can move as one. We need to find the middle of these and set them all out. I've got myself a little angle finder, centre finder from eBay that I can use on these, and essentially that just gives me a centre. So that's my up and down vertical. What I'll do when I've finished this, I'm just going to mark out where the holes will go for the bolts, and I can drill those. What I want to do then is just make a little jig with the two ends mounted on a board, right distance apart, and the axle cut to the right length, and I can just give it a fabricator and say, just stick that together for me. Right. Now that is leaving me with 18mm to put my 8mm bolts in. So if I go to 9mm there and 9mm there, and I drill those for an 8mm, that'll leave me a 4mm radius, 4mm diameter, 4mm radius, yes, sorry. So that'll mean that's not too close to the edge. I don't think. That should be okay. I could perhaps have done with these being a tad bigger. Couple of things that trying to catch me out here. I nearly, because that axle stub end goes in at that angle, I was going to trim the bottom off to fit to the shape of the discs that I'm putting on, but I've just realised before I cut it off, which is a good job, that of course the bolts are going in at right angles. So there isn't a huge amount of meat in there anyway, and if I trimmed all that off I'd probably have a bolt sticking out with no thread. So I'm going to move these up as far as I possibly can towards the top of the axle end to give me the maximum amount of drill hole and threading capacity on that one, and the same then, that one goes down deeper into it, so that's less of a problem. it does sort of beg the question as to whether or not that will hold. I'm sure it will. But we've got the holes drilled in these discs, pilot holes drilled. Unusually for me, I can see daylight through both of them when they're put together, so they're both in the same place. I've put a centre line down the end of the axle stub ends, and I'm just marked again where those centres will be, so I can drill these out to suit and get them tapped, and that means I can get these drilled out to 8mm diameter, and they're then ready to have welded to the end of the metal axle. Now, as ever, the more I leave things or wait for things to happen, the more I change my mind yet again. I had second thoughts about these stub axle ends when I marked out where the discs that were originally going to be the metal discs, steel discs on the end of the axle, they were going to go into the end of the stub axles here, and I needed to drill. I've marked them out, drill holes in and thread them, and the more I looked at it, the top one was fine, it went down into meat. The bottom one is starting to get a bit close to the outside edge, and I'm a bit less happy about that as a fixing method on something that's carrying a lot of weight. All the bottom is getting a tearing motion on it all the while. So I've just checked with my welder man, and he says he can TIG weld aluminium. So I'm going back round and round in circles, here we go, to going with the metal plate TIG welded onto the actual stub axle, and then the steel plates on the centre part, and then I'll just drill 2 holes through and bolt those together with a couple of bolts on there, and I think that should sort me. So at least then I'll have a TIG welded joint all the way around that plate. I've just made a little jig up for the man welding up the axle, so that I can get my 6-degree caster angle sort of set up to suit. And what I've done, I've taken the end plates and I've drilled holes in a pair of plywood discs, or plywood plates I mean, 6 degrees slightly sloping, and that will mean that when that is put together with an aluminium disc on there, if I drill the holes at 90 degrees to the actual end plate, it means I'll have that 6-degree caster built in, and the hole will come out right in the middle at the thickest part of that end plate. So those 2 end plates are set at 6 degrees. I've marked the positions of the 2 spring hangers that I want. So what it means is my man can now cut the axle to the exact length, drop it into that, or he can drill the holes through for the spring hangers, pop them in, drop the whole thing down onto these pieces here which put the height exactly right for that to be in the centre, and then the whole thing can be tacked up. So that's the axle front end all already sort of hopefully sorted. Well, that's it. It's too late now to do anything different. I've just taken the all of the bits over to the guy that's doing the welding for me, and rightly or wrongly that's the way it's going to go, and we'll see in weeks, months time, who knows whether or not it's successful. I hope the video was of interest. Look forward to seeing you next week when we'll be doing something different on the cart. I'll see you then. Bye!